Hello, everyone. My name is Rich Clybourne, and I'm the Executive Director of the Gundalow Company. We're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to protect the maritime heritage and environment of the Piscataqua region through education and action. I want to welcome you to our 5th virtual Gundalow gathering. Tonight, we're going to shift gears a little and adopt our tried and true science cafe format. The only thing missing is someone to wait on us and bring us food and beer, but I think we can all figure that part of it out. We have with us 3 gentlemen with ties to the University of New Hampshire and all who have a level of expertise in our topic, which is exploring the environmental effects of COVID-19. Before we kick things off, I wanted to provide you with a quick update on our Gundalow and the start of our sailing season. Captain Matt, with the help of our relief captain Heather and her son and a few others, were able to uncover the boat and dismantle the wooden framework for the cover and store it at Great Bay Marina over the past several days. The next task will most likely be stepping the masts and the yard and re-rigging the sail. With those tasks completed, Piscataqua will be just about ready to sail. As far as the start of our sailing season goes, we're in a bit of a holding pattern, awaiting guidelines from the state and the city for reopening recreation, leisure, and hospitality businesses. We're preparing a reopening plan that will address COVID-19 social distancing, group gathering size, and sanitization practices for all of our operations. We're anticipating the season to start at some point during the summer, but we'll be implementing our reopening plan and complying with all the guidelines and best practices before we make a decision to start sailing. We'll keep you posted with regular updates. A few housekeeping items before I introduce our first panelist. Number 1, your mics are muted, and that will remain so until we start into the question and answer portion of the evening. To ensure everyone can hear the panelists and the questions, please do not unmute your mic. If you want to ask the panelists a question, please type it into the chat section. Identify who you want to answer the question as well. I will unmute your mic so that you can ask your questions directly. If you're having computer issues, you can send an email to info@gundalow.org or call the office number 603-433-9505. The calls are being forwarded to a staff member who will attempt to help you resolve those issues. We will be recording tonight's discussion and we'll make the link to the recording available to everyone on our YouTube channel. The format tonight, I'll introduce each speaker individually and they'll make some opening remarks. After all of our panelists have made their opening remarks, I'll begin the question and answer segment. Now for our first panelist. Larry Hamilton is a professor of sociology and a senior fellow in the Carsey School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire, where he teaches courses about society in the Arctic, survey research, and statistical analysis. His most recent papers include Cold Winters Warming, Perceptions of Climate Change in the North Country, Demographic Variation of Demographic Variation and Change in the Inuit Arctic, and A Change in the Wind, U.S. Public Views on Renewable Energy and Climate Compared. So with that, I'll turn it over to Larry, and he can provide his opening remarks. Let me get to the point where I can unmute you there, Larry. Hold on a second. Okay, you should be unmuted.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Yeah, I'm a sociologist. I'm going to share some slides with you here for a very brief introduction. And yeah, the environmental impacts of COVID-19. You may all have seen those news pictures of kangaroos and coyotes walking through city streets, or heard reports about fishing grounds that are no longer being visited, or even in your local woods. You may have noticed that there's a lot more foot traffic all of a sudden. So there are a lot of direct environmental impacts being felt, reduced air pollution, but not so much reduced greenhouse gases and many other things. I'm going to take a different tack, though, being a sociologist, and I'm going to propose that one of the largest environmental impacts of COVID-19 potentially is the issue of whether it will affect U.S. voting behavior. And I'll show you some slides to set up that possibility. So we have been doing surveys for more than a decade on what Americans understand and believe about science and environmental topics. It was a very easy pivot, or a very direct pivot, I should say, to start doing surveys related to the coronavirus, because all the apparatus, all the methods, all the theories that we've been working with all along on other topics seem to apply amazingly well to this brand new phenomenon. We ran a survey statewide survey in New Hampshire in March, and then again in mid-April. And one of the questions we asked on it was really basic. Have you changed your daily routine in any way, specifically because of the coronavirus? And people could answer in major ways, such as leaving home less often, or minor ways like washing my hands more, or no changes at all. You see in the chart on the left, on the right rather, how the New Hampshire respondents reacted to that question on the March survey. More than 3/4 said they had made major changes, such as leaving home less often. And this was all done before the official stay-at-home order. So already there was a very large statewide response. Now, the governor's stay-at-home proclamation came just as the survey was wrapping up on March 26th. And about 3 weeks later, we ran about a month later, we ran a second survey, again statewide, and asked the same question. And the whole world had changed in that month. And the survey responses budged hardly at all. 79% were in April were now saying that they'd made major changes in their life. It meant different things then. In March, people were canceling their travel and going out to dinner less often. In April, it meant they were staying home from work. But the response was amazingly stable. So why was there so little difference? It turns out that the answer is because the views are anchored in people's socio-political identity. One example you see here is the relationship between whether you were leaving home less often, whether you were staying home, and how frequently you watch Fox News. And there's a clear gradient there. People who never watch Fox News are much more likely to be staying home, and the people who watch it every day are by far the least likely. And this pattern, this sort of the angling gradient you see here as a function of Fox News, we would see the same thing if we use political party or ideology or approval of President Trump. Very similar gradients, no matter how we measure socio-political identity. But this pattern was very familiar in another way, which is we've been seeing it for years on other surveys asking other questions. This one, for example, is whether or not people would give high priority to developing new sources of renewable energy. Same gradient, actually a bit steeper. Here again, I'm using Fox News as my example, but it could work with anything else too. Or climate change. So as I say, I've been seeing graphs like this for a very long time. I don't want to keep seeing it. I want to discover new things, but this is the gorilla in the room anytime you do a survey on any topic related to science or the environment in the US. So to put this in context, what you have here is a chart showing the number of new daily confirmed cases of COVID-19 in New Hampshire over the time period from March 8th to May 6th. And the period of our April survey is marked there in blue. The period of the, let's see, see if we can get a laser pointer happening here. Yeah, so this is the March survey here, and here's the governor's stay-at-home order. So the survey was all beforehand, but even so, most people had made major changes in their life. Now, the stay-at-home order has no effect for about something like 10 days. There's a latency period with the disease. So this is the early period of exponential growth in New Hampshire, and of course it was happening everywhere else in the world too. And then here's where the stay-at-home order sort of kicks in. The blue line is the 7-day average. So the bars are each day, but the blue line is better shows the overall trends. Here's the effect of the stay-at-home order. In other words, it ramped up here before it had any effect. And then it starts climbing again. The red bars here are the timing of the April survey. as it's starting to grow. So you can see that, you know, back here we're getting something like 10 to 20 new cases a day. Out here we're getting more than 50. And of course today, this is up to date as of yesterday, the 7-day average is its highest point ever. So the stay-at-home order broke the exponential growth, but it didn't reverse it. It didn't stop the growth, and it's still marching upwards as of yesterday. I'll keep tracking this. And we're now, you know, whereas back here we were around 5 or maybe even 20 cases a day, and in here we're around 50 or so. Out here we're well above 80. So that's where we are in the pandemic. What we're seeing here is that you know, all that is changing, and yet the survey stayed the same. The survey stayed the same because people's responses to the COVID-19 pandemic are anchored to their socio-political identity. And that gives them just a lot of stability that is sort of independent of real world events. And we've seen that on many other sorts of things, watching views about climate change not be altered by fires or hurricanes or any number of things you would think would have perhaps a big effect. So basically, longstanding divisions regarding science and the environment are shaping how the US responds to the pandemic. And I guess the question I would end with here is whether that experience, that is the connection of socio-political identity to how people view the pandemic, things are changing in real time. They're changing really fast, and maybe that experience will, for some people, start to disconnect or shift their views on science and the environment out of these sort of strongly entrenched habits. So that's my introduction, and I'd be happy to give you an idea what sorts of things what cards I hold. Be happy to take the discussion any direction anyone wants later. I believe Cameron will talk next.
Yes, our next panelist is Cameron Wake. Cameron is a research professor at the Institute for the Study of Earth, Oceans, and Space and the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of New Hampshire. He leads a research program investigating regional climate change through the analysis of ice cores, records, and historical and instrumental data, and helps lead Climate Solutions New England. Cam, let me unmute you. All right, you should be good.
Thanks so much, Rich, and welcome everybody to this Science Cafe. I can see a few of you, but I hope you've had a chance to gather your favorite beverage. For those of you that don't know me, I've been working on ice cores for about the last 30 years, but really over the course of the last 20 years, I've become very interested in sustainability and really trying to focus on solutions to how we might address our changing climate. And I'm really excited for our discussion tonight because I think there's some really valuable lessons learned. And I think actually a lot of them are more sort of socially and behaviorally based than environmentally based. So it was great to have Larry start off with his perspective. I'm going to share a few images, share my screen about sort of how the environment has changed, and then finish up talking about how sort of humans' relationship with the environment might be changing in the way we might behave differently in the future. So I'm going to share. There we go. Start. All right. So as you all know, we're all traveling less. We're all driving less. We're all going out to dinner less. And as a result, there's been a significant decrease in energy demand. So this is from the International Energy Agency, from their Global Energy Review 2020. And these are projections of the amount of energy demand for a full 2020. So there are some projections in here relative to 2019. So what you see is that on the far right hand in the orange bar, that total energy demand has been down about 6%. And as a result, greenhouse gases have been down around 8%, which is the single largest drop we've seen in greenhouse gas emissions in many decades, even more than what we saw in the global recession of 2008. I would really caution all people that might think this is great for the environment, is that it is relatively temporary. And we know from the 2008 recession that when the economy gets going again, the emissions are going to ramp up again. The other part that is important to caution is that we're now looking at tens of millions of people in the US alone who are unemployed, and the global economy sort of being reduced and grinding down to really its like essential services. And frankly, that's not the way that we need to go about thinking about how to reduce greenhouse gases. It's not putting people out of work, it's actually by putting people into work. And so while we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions, this is not the way to do it. On the flip side, I think the piece that is really encouraging is you'll see that energy demand from coal, from gas, from oil, and from nuclear are all down. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're just using a lot less electricity. Well, the gas we're traveling, yes. Coal, oil, and nuclear, we're just using a lot less electricity. But interestingly, as those other fossil fuel and nuclear sources have decreased, our renewables have increased. So why is that? Because they're ready to be dispatched and they're less expensive than the other forms of energy. So I think this is a really important phenomena in that we're actually seeing countries now that are going weeks at a time powered solely on renewable energy. And this is a really good lesson for us. It's a really good test to see that actually renewables can actually provide a significant portion of our energy. And for some countries, like the United Kingdom, they can provide all of the energy. And no doubt that we have to figure out storage for energy, but I think this is a really encouraging sign. And as a scientist, I think of these, of a lot of experiences as sort of tests or scientific experiments. And in this case, like this is one that would never be commissioned by any responsible body, but it is showing some interesting results that the demand for renewables is the only energy source that is increased. Some other sort of really big changes in the environment is we stopped pumping so much pollution into the atmosphere that the visibility has improved dramatically. When we drive our cars, when we use electricity that's powered by coal or oil, we emit a whole bunch of pollutants into the atmosphere, and many of those drive the transformation into particles, which reduce the visibility. Fine particles are also really bad for human health. Those fine particles kill millions of people around the globe each year. So what you're seeing here is a picture of Los Angeles on April 15th, and certainly an image that I've never seen of Los Angeles, but really sort of crystal clear air. So not only is the air clean, but actually fewer people are going to be suffering respiratory distress from fine particles, even at the same time as more people are actually suffering as a result of COVID-19. But we are dramatically cleaning up the air. Again, I would argue this is not the way we want to do it by tanking our economy, but there is this impact. And I think one of the things that is really, I'm just getting some light changes here. One of the things that's really important is that it clearly shows that if we reduce our emissions, the atmosphere actually cleans up relatively quickly.
I'm getting text because you're not showing up right on Zoom. I know you are, and people can't see you, so I'm getting text.
All right, sorry about that. We're trying to fix the lighting on this end. We can also see images from around the world that show this. So here's an image of the Taj Mahal before, sorry, this was last April, and then the current image. And you can see dramatic improvements in air quality. And then it's not only the air that's being cleaned up, but the water in cities is being cleaned up. And this has been a pretty famous set of pictures from Venice over the course of March, in that because of the significant decrease in boat traffic on the rivers, that the water is actually much, much cleaner. In fact, it's cleaner than many people ever remember it seeing. People can see the fish in the water. So significant changes not only to air quality, but also to water quality. And then last but not least for my images, this is a sort of a somewhat more scientific analysis of what we're seeing in our atmosphere. This is nitrogen dioxide over the Northeast as measured from a NASA satellite, the Aura Ozone Monitoring Instrument. And you can see on the upper image from March 15th to the 19th, the average nitrogen oxides there, sort of relatively high, those dark purples and reds. And nitrogen oxides are really important because they help drive the formation of ozone and fine particles. So they essentially come from the high temperature combustion. When you run your car or you run a power plant, you actually emit lots of nitrogen dioxide. So they're a very good tracer for sources of pollution. And then you can see on the bottom graph there in March 20th, the dramatic reduction in the concentration of nitrogen dioxide. There's still you can see there's still higher concentrations down around New York City, but really the rest of the Northeast has cleaned up dramatically. And we're especially clean up here in southern New Hampshire and Seacoast, Maine. All right, so why don't I stop my share there? Hopefully some of you can see me a little bit better. That was my wife helping me out with my lack of lighting skills. A few other sort of environmental changes I just wanted to suggest that I think are important. One of the things is that we now know that there's a whole suite of meetings that aren't happening, international and national meetings that were actually previously scheduled to work on reducing greenhouse gas emissions around the globe. I'm sure you've all heard that the Olympics have been canceled in Japan, sort of a tragedy for all those athletes. But there's a whole set of other United Nations meetings under the Framework Convention for Climate Change that are not going to happen. And they were really important meetings that were supposed to follow on the Paris Agreement and really try to help us figure out how we were going to significantly reduce emissions. And the latest calls are that essentially we need to go to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And how we're going to do that is a really big challenge. And we don't know how we're going to do that as a globe. And as a result of sort of the clampdown, those meetings are not going to happen. I think we've also begun to identify that, coming back to what Larry started with, is that data is really important. And so I know I've been following the COVID-19 data daily, finding out what's happening in New Hampshire and Maine and around the country and around the world. But I think there's people, one of the big differences between COVID-19 and climate change is that climate change is sort of the slow moving disaster. And COVID-19 is the really fast disaster with really fast feedbacks. And so when you don't pay attention and you don't socially distance yourself, there are immediate and fast and severe consequences to doing that. And so one of my hopes is we do come out of this and actually have an understanding that it's really hard to address big challenges without science. And when we dig deep, actually science is at a lot of the really big decisions that we make. So, one of my hopes is that people like Dr. Fauci are actually seen as really important for helping protect and enhance our quality of life. And last but not least, I think there's been a really big perception change in that we don't always have to drive everywhere to meet to get stuff done, that it's okay not to travel to get work done. We as scientists are continuing to hold conferences, we're continuing to meet, we're continuing to work on proposals, work on papers, share ideas. It's different for sure, but my expectation is coming out of this is that I think we might just be traveling less, and maybe we'll just have a little bit more time, as we have over the course of the last few weeks, to actually think about what's really important in our lives and not just running around trying to get stuff done. And I would hope one of the things that we realize is really important is that as we have been sort of cooped up and locked in our homes, that the ability to get outside, to breathe fresh air, to have clean water, to see vistas we haven't seen before is just really important. So I'm hoping that there is sort of a cognitive behavioral change as a result of this. And perhaps I'm being naive, perhaps I'm being too hopeful, but I hope that that carries over after this is over, and we can really ask the big question of what is the good life and answer that collectively. So why don't I stop there, and I'll pass it back to Rich.
Thanks, Cam. I think most of us subscribe to that point of view that you just put out there about taking the time to really think about what's important. So, okay, so our third panelist is Kala Matzo. Kala joins us from the Piscataqua Region Estuaries Partnership. At PrEP, as the Coastal Science Program Manager, Kala is responsible for developing and managing the science-based programs and projects. Before coming to PrEP, Kala helped manage the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, or NERS, Science Collaborative, and the research portfolio for the Cooperative Institute for Coastal and Estuarine Environmental Technology, also at the University of New Hampshire. Kala?
Am said, cheers. Wish we could be in a cafe. Hope everyone's having a great night. So as Rich said, I work for the Piscataqua Region Estuaries Partnership, also known as PrEP. And our job is to really keep an eye on that estuary there where the Gundalow calls its home, right? The Piscataqua River, and also the Hampton Seabrook estuary. Well, the thing I want to say tonight, I mean, my take-home message is it's not so evidence-based. It's really more of a hope, and that is that maybe with the slowdown that Cam just referred to, maybe there's an opening for us to, as development slows down, maybe there's an opening for us to get a little more conservation of open space to happen in this little niche that might just be a few months. Maybe it's a little bit more, but maybe it's enough for us to increase conservation. And conservation is really important to the things that I care about in terms of my job. And you see a couple of those habitats behind me. You should see some eelgrass behind me, and you should see some oysters. And there's a lot of other important habitats, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus. Actually, tonight I'm just going to talk about oysters. If you have any questions about eelgrass, perhaps that'll come up in the Q&A. So what's the connection between conservation and development and oysters? Well, when we develop, as this region has really developed quite a bit in the last 50 years, you end up with a lot more sediments in your estuary. And that happens because you got more impervious surfaces, and so there's more washing of the sediments into the estuary, and more impervious surfaces usually lead to stream erosion. All you need is about 3 or 4% impervious cover in your watershed, and streams start to erode, which means you're going to have more sediment in your estuary. Most of our towns are definitely above 3 or 4% impervious cover. So what happens when those sediments come into the estuary? Well, two things happen to oysters. One, they get literally smothered. As you may know, we've lost a lot of oysters recently in the last 20, 30 years, and people are trying to restore these reefs. And it's frustrating because we're laying down these great reefs, and they're literally getting smothered to the point where sometimes you can't find them where you put them. What else is a problem? Well, another problem is the way that oysters eat is that, you may know, they just kind of open up, what's called gaping, and they pump the water into their system. But every time they get a bunch of sediment, they have to surround that sediment with mucus and eject it in what's called pseudofeces. And if they have to do that too much, they eventually just go, well, I'm just going to stop eating. And of course, stop eating is not a great program for health. By the way, it was very important to me that I get to use the word pseudofeces tonight, and Rich was kind enough to let me, so I appreciate that, Rich. So I could also talk about eelgrass, but in the interest of time, I'm going to stop there and just say, I live in Kittery, and I'm also on the Kittery Land Trust. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of case study evidence here. And that is, first of all, as I think maybe it was Rich who mentioned earlier, but in the Kittery properties, the land trust properties are seeing more people out on the properties, maybe double, triple. And I know, speaking with Larry Hamilton, that the same is happening where he lives in Lee. Well, I wanted to talk to the planners in Kittery and find out what they're seeing, and if they thought that COVID might have any sort of a change on their life and their work life, that is. And I talked to a couple of planners, and they both said very, very similar things, and that is, as you would expect, they're sort of putting out the fires activity of entertaining new applications for new buildings or modifications to existing buildings has gone way, way down. And as you may know, if you pay attention to these sort of things, I mean, the life of a planner is usually sort of just oftentimes really just putting out fires, and you're kind of thinking about, gee, we have this master plan or this comprehensive plan, depending on what state you're in, they call it different things. And we really want to start to get at some of the things in those plans, but they're so busy putting out fires. So both the planners I talked to in Kittery said, you know, there might be an opportunity here. We're finally getting the chance to get some long-term planning done. And there's an opportunity here, and it really depends on the leadership. And I mean that like the town council and the planning board, but also the people who are really active in your town. If they have a vision for how they want to take advantage of this opportunity, it might just be there for the taking. And so I got really excited. I'm an optimist like Cameron, and I got really excited when he said that to me. And I said, well, what do I do? What do I tell folks? I'm going to be on this panel for the Gundalow company. What do I tell folks to do? And the answer I got was very surprising. He said, well, go out and enjoy that open space. And I was expecting something a little bit more, I don't know, scientific, concrete. I don't know. I mean, actually, that's pretty concrete. Go out and enjoy. But then he said, look, nobody is going to fight for things that they don't enjoy. They're not going to fight for things that they don't feel on a visceral level. So the first thing is get people out on those beautiful properties. And now is a great time to do it when the beaches are closed and other places. And then they're going to realize how valuable conservation is. And okay, so what if you're a person who's already getting out all the time? By the way, if you haven't gotten out on the Kittery properties, please come over here. Just go on the website and check them out. And they're really gorgeous. We'd welcome you. So if you are one of these folks who've already out there and enjoying and viscerally enjoying these spaces, then maybe the next step is to call the planning department or call the land trust and see if you can get involved. That's how change is going to happen, if it will happen, in this little crack that we're seeing right now. It's by people being very, very connected to the land and then being ready to vote in a certain way when things come up in front of the town council or the planning board. So I'll leave it there. And again, I'm happy to chat more about eelgrass or sort of why open space from a more technical scientific standpoint is so great environmentally, ecologically. Happy to get into that. But I'll stop there for now and see if folks have questions for me or for my fellow panelists.
Thanks, Kala. So folks, as I mentioned at the beginning here, if you want to ask a question of the panelists, please type that into the chat room box here, and I will call on folks as I get these questions. If you're not familiar with it, if you put your cursor down near the bottom of the screen, you'll see the word chat with a little icon above it. Just click on that and you can type in your question. Once again, I also ask, if you're going to ask a question, that you designate who you want to answer it. That can be either Larry, it could be Cam, it could be Kala, or it could be all three or two of the three, however you want to do it. So we'll wait a second here and see if we get any questions coming in. And while we're waiting, this is to all three of you guys. A question about, you showed us some pictures of things that are going on around the world with the environment cleaning up. Is there anything specifically in this local area that you all have seen, whether it's with a sociology event or climate, or even some of the stuff that's going on in the estuary right now, or at least during the time period since we've shut everything down and have been going with the stay-at-home order? And I gotta unmute you guys. Okay, you're unmuted, Larry.
Okay. Yeah. Well, as Kala was mentioning, we've seen on the town conservation land right by our house maybe a fourfold increase in traffic. These trails that I think we used to be almost the only traffic on now are wide and starting to erode. And that's a good thing, I guess, because the town paid money for that land. And as Carla was saying, if people don't know it's there, they're not going to support it. But something, and obviously we're very privileged to live in a place where we can do that. But something else that struck me that was very unexpected is, like the rest of you, I imagine, most of you, I'm working from home mainly now. And as a professor, that involves a lot of meetings, but I also get invited to give public talks. And I kind of expected that there would be a trailing off of interest when people couldn't actually go somewhere to do things. And I found just the opposite, that there's more engagement, more demand, more interest now in the content you might put out in various kinds of outreach Zoom talks. This is my first virtual science cafe, and I'm in the spirit of it here with a good local craft beer. But I'm getting invited. This is my third, I think, talk this week, and that's I usually don't do that many in a month. And I think people sitting at home are not just I don't know what, apathetic and giving up. That they are listening, they're interested, they're engaged, and talking about things. So that was an unexpected and it's I think a positive development.
I think one of the things I'd add in addition to seeing a lot more people out on trails when I go out and use them is we live on the Kittery side of the Piscataqua River, and we look right across at downtown Portsmouth. And the reduction in the noise pollution has been substantial. So while we still sort of hear the trucks coming over the bridges, the evenings are significantly quieter than they used to be. I'm sure all sort of those sparkling voices on the water represented a lot of income and a lot of profit for those restaurants, and it's sad that they're not getting it right now. But certainly it's much quieter in the evenings in Portsmouth, sitting across the water.
Carla, any input there?
No, unfortunately, we haven't been allowed to go out into the field until very recently. So I'd have to ask my friends at the Jackson Estuarine Lab, who just in the last 2 weeks were finally able to get out into the estuary, if they've noticed anything. But I do think there's a lot of other factors, of course, that are going to be impacting the water quality. Unlike in the example that Cameron offered with that beautiful river in Venice, when you have a big open system like the Great Bay Estuary, I don't think you're going to see as immediate an impact. But like I say, I'll have to check with my folks, my friends at Jackson Estuarine Lab before I give you an answer. Sorry.
That's okay. So we've had a couple of questions come in, and I'll start here with Gretchen. Go ahead, Gretchen, ask your question.
So I guess my question was, we know that changes in factory production and things are impacting not necessarily climate, but some of the things we're seeing in the atmosphere. But the whole supply chain is impacted. So I've seen a few things about shipping lanes and changes in boat traffic. Do we think that any of these changes, the fact that we don't necessarily need to buy everything we're buying, but apparently we need to buy toilet paper and hand sanitizer, how might those habits linger, or maybe they won't? I don't know who is the best, maybe Barry and Cameron, to address that question.
I'll take a stab at one, and it's probably the consumer product that we don't think that much about, but we use all the time, and that's gasoline. The reduction in the demand for gasoline, combined with the fact that there was already an oversupply in Saudi Arabia and Russia were in sort of a production war, has had severe consequences for the profits.
Right, we're going to go on. So look sharp.
For big fossil fuel companies, in some ways this might drive one of those behavioral changes that we've been on the cusp of for a long time. And it's that investments in fossil fuel companies they haven't been returning much in the way of profit for the last 5 years, maybe even a decade. And that's certainly the case over the course of the past sort of 3 to 4 months. They've tanked. And so where does that money go? It's going to be taken out of fossil fuels, and hopefully people are putting it into things, at least partially into renewable energy, which is where we need the investment. And so we might have just hit that tipping point where people understand that probably renewables are a way better investment, by which I mean greater return, lower risk than fossil fuels are now, even though those fossil fuel energy investments have done really well over the course of the past 60 to 80 years.
Anyone else want to contribute to that one? All right, next question is coming from Carrie Kenny. Let me unmute you, Carrie, and you can ask your question. Go ahead, Carrie.
Hi, everybody. I just was curious if we could talk about the eelgrasses, and the oyster conversation was really interesting, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about the eelgrass impact. Thank you.
Can you hear me right now, Rich?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for that question. Well, I can give you just a quick sense of how eelgrass is doing broadly, and the kind of things that are really affecting eelgrass primarily. I don't think that the signal, if you will, from COVID, it'll be really hard to tease out, and it might not be that great, but it could be that I'm just missing something. And so if anybody has a better idea, please jump in. But I mean, classically, there's 2 things that bother eelgrass: too much nutrients and too much sediments. I mean, that's a worldwide thing, right? That's like, if you have cardiovascular disease, you decrease, you eat right, you stop smoking, and you make sure you're not stressed, right? It's just classic, and it's the same thing with eelgrass. If eelgrass is going away, you look at your nutrients and you look at your sediments. And before you start looking at any other craziness like green crabs or dredging impacts, that's what you look at. And the fact is we have very elevated levels of both those things, right? Both nutrients and sediments. So I think, getting to your question, you'd have to ask yourself, well, how is COVID and people being in quarantine going to affect nutrients? Well, most of the nutrients are coming from either wastewater, either via the waste treatment plants or from septic tanks. I don't see that changing that much. Again, let me know if I'm missing something on that. Stormwater, there's nutrients in stormwater, but I still think it's still going to rain. But maybe there's, because there's less traffic, there might be a little less pollutants to run off the roads. And then there's atmospheric deposition. I mean, actually about 25–30% of the nutrients are coming from atmospheric deposition. So I don't know if Cameron can let us know if he would expect that there would be a decrease in the composition of that atmospheric component, because maybe there would be. And we would probably need to wait a while to see that signal. I would let you know that, a big thank you is owed to all of our local towns, Portsmouth, Dover, Rochester, Exeter, Newmarket. They're all making fantastic upgrades in their wastewater treatment plants. And we would hope to see some improvements soon. Not that nitrogen is the only issue, but it is one of the issues. So we would hope to see some reaction of the eelgrass. Our most recent survey was in 2019, and we did see eelgrass increasing in pretty much every zone. And especially around Little Bay, near Newark's over there, we went from 3 acres of eelgrass to 21 acres. That's a pretty big jump up. And it jumped up all over the estuary. So let's just hope that continues.
Yeah, I just add briefly, Kyle, I think it's worth doing the experiment, is that I expect that 30 to 35% that is atmospheric deposition, not only directly to the water, but also to surfaces that then run off in precipitation, is now going down. So we've cleaned up the atmosphere. So there's a lot less nitrogen oxides, which is what I showed, but there's a lot fewer particles being deposited, less pollution. Pollution can be sticky, sticks on leaves, sticks on surfaces. So I think it would be interesting if and when you get the chance to go out and see if there's a short-term reaction, at least in terms of water quality. It might not translate over to the eelgrass and the oysters, but I suspect that you're reducing about a third of the pollutant delivery to the ecosystem because our air is so much cleaner right now.
Agreed.
All right. Our next question is coming from Stephanie Abrams. So let me unmute you, Stephanie, and you can ask your question. Hold on a second. For some reason, it won't. Oh, there you go. Go ahead and ask, Stephanie. Oh, we're not hearing you. Still not hearing you. Sorry. So let me go ahead and ask the question to, okay. So this one is for Cameron. Stephanie would like to, or said that the stats on energy usage did not take into account increased energy use in residential homes. Is there any information on that?
So that data I showed is global energy demand. So it does include residential demand for energy, but it's part of a much bigger piece. And so while there might be modest increases in residential energy, it's being completely and wholly offset by reductions in energy use, primarily at all of the institutions, or most of the institutions where we work, that are now shut down. So, and I didn't look into the extent to which residential energy had increased. But overall, in the US and around the world, demand for electricity is down substantially, to the point that utility companies are now beginning to get a little worried about their profits.
Okay, next question is coming from JB. JB, let me unmute you and you can ask your question directly. You should be good. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So Cameron, this is for you. This goes back to what you and I'm going to mispronounce it, Kaylee, we're just talking about, whether the short-term, so we know that climate and weather are not linked, but with the short-term reduction of human activity, less particulate in the air from pollution, vehicle traffic and things like that, we're experiencing one of the coldest springs we've had in a long time. Does the clear air have any impact on that? Do we see any patterns or trends? I know we're not talking long term. I'm not talking climate. I'm talking like, what do we know today?
Yeah, so good question, JB, and nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. It's hard to sort of draw a line to clearer skies and colder temperatures. So you can sort of try to unpack this in many different ways. What I would expect is that having less pollution means that we'd have less precipitation. Not that we're not going to have precipitation, but all those pollutants actually serve as cloud condensation nuclei that are really important so water vapor can actually condense on a particle. It takes much less energy for that to happen. And you all know that because when you walk out on a cool morning and there's dew on the grass, right? It's condensing on the grass, not in the atmosphere. And so I would have expected less precipitation events. And frankly, I think at least just personal experience, it seemed to rain a lot in April this year.
Yes,
and then the colder temperatures, right? So maybe at night, if we have clearer skies, the earth is radiating, it's getting cooler. But then that you'd expect would be offset during the day, where we had clearer skies with more sun coming in. And then also those cloud condensation, without that pollution and those cloud condensation nuclei, we wouldn't be forming as many clouds. So you'd expect even more sun to come in. So I would think that the weather and the short-term cleanup in the atmosphere is that there's not a lot of connection right now. Unlike with sort of the pollution deposition into Great Bay. I think that's a much tighter path that we can understand. It is going to be interesting, when we look back on this time, we're going to be able to go back and analyze and sort of, get a measure of the pollution and actually probably do some tests on pollution is normal, this atmospheric circulation pattern with and without pollution using a computer model and see if we can actually tease out that question.
It's funny, as a quick follow-up, I remember post September 11th, when planes weren't flying, humans we've had no chance to study, really to look at what, near-term models without condensation trails look like until that event happened. And so some independent studies happened, and they did see some slight connection to your point about real slight. Exactly. Raindrops fill buckets, right?
Yeah, I will emphasize again, though, that I'm just always amazed at how robust the environment is and how quickly the air is cleaned up and the water can be cleaned up when we stop pouring garbage into it. And so maybe that's another lesson we can learn, is that we can really enjoy this clean air and these beautiful vistas actually, and maintain our quality of life, because now we can get our energy from renewables, and we prove that too.
All right, next question is coming from Lisa Cote. Let me unmute you, Lisa, and you can ask your question directly. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, this question is for Kala. So we talk a lot about eelgrass and oysters, and I'm wondering if there are other species beneficial to the estuary that we can expect to flourish as or when oysters and eelgrass are reestablished in the estuary. If so, which species, and how will this affect overall biodiversity in the estuary?
Hi, Lisa. Nice to hear your voice again. Yeah, JB, it's a weird name. It's pronounced Kala, not the way it's spelled. So no worries on that one. Lisa, I mean, part of the reason we fight so hard for eelgrass and oysters is because they serve this really important nursery function to a host of important species, commercially important, recreationally important, or just sort of ecologically important fish to invertebrates. Both oysters and eelgrass do this. If you look at the water behind me, you go, wow, that's some really clear water. Well, part of the reason that water is so clear is because there's oysters and eelgrass in it. That's what they do, right? I mean, oysters are just this pump. They're just pumping and filtering water, and eelgrass slows the water down so all the sediments come out of suspension, and so they clear the water. So, they're really, really important for almost any kind of fish or invertebrate species you can think of in the estuary, as well as for humans. I mean, let's not leave humans out of this. A lot of us who live near the coast, we're worried about storm surge and things like that. And you can tell by the structure, just look at the pictures behind me, that really slows down and mitigates storm surge, high tide events. So there's a whole host of species that benefit when these systems are doing as well as they should. In 1993, we had 23 million oysters. We have less than 3 million today, 90% decrease. We're at about 45-50% decrease on eelgrass. So we really want to work on both of these, trying to work together and get both of these increasing, and see if we can kind of reverse the feedback cycle that might be happening right now. I don't know, it's sort of like the same thing happens with our bodies. I don't know if you can all relate to that. You feel like one good thing happens and then another good thing, and then unfortunately it happens in the other way. You hurt your hip and then something else goes. So it's the same with the environment. These things tend to follow upon each other. There's these feedback loops. So we're trying really hard to reverse the direction and make our habitats as resilient as possible to deal with things that are coming from climate change, more storms, warming waters, and things like that. Hope I answered your question there, Lisa.
Just as a follow-up, I was just wondering, are there kind of specific follow-on species that once you see the eelgrass and the oysters doing great, we see more finfish, or we see more crustaceans, or we see more whatever, and that brings on more birds and more I don't know, whatever, is there a food chain that we expect to to rebound if we see the resilience of these indicator species?
Yeah, finfish is a great, you actually mentioned two of the ones I'd point out would be finfish, especially these species that migrate, that go up into the freshwater and then back out and spend some of their lifespan into the ocean. So everything from American eel, smelt, herring, they require habitat connectivity so that they can shield themselves from predators as they make their way on this long journey. So there's a lot of other things that are going to, offer them challenges along the way, like dams and culverts and things like that in the freshwater portion. But if we had a lot more habitat connectivity in the estuary, their lives would definitely benefit. The other thing is birds. It's very interesting. Some of you may know Fred Short, who's the eelgrass expert. He's now retired and has moved to the West Coast, but one of his last projects was working up in Canada. He was commissioned by the Cree, indigenous people of the Cree up in Canada, because their main thing they eat up there is waterfowl, geese and such, and the geese were disappearing. Why were the geese disappearing? Because the eelgrass was disappearing. And that had to do mostly up there with the fact that the big hydro power, sorry, Cam, not to give hydropower a bad name, but they had altered the water patterns such that there was a lot more fresh water going into the estuary, and the eelgrass wasn't doing as well. So I would say finfish and birds, Lisa, to your question.
All right. Next question is coming from Dee. Let me unmute you, Dee, and you can ask your question. Go ahead, Dee.
Okay, as part of the development team and staff, I first want to thank Calais and Larry and Cameron for coming on board. These virtual Gundalow gatherings have been just a wonderful way of letting us keep our audience and our community engaged and know that we still care about them and that we are still here working and doing our best to inform our community, doing the best we can. I was really interested, you all had mentioned the reduction of noise. So I live very close to the beach and it's very early on in the season. So obviously we will not be seeing the influx of tourists and cars and coming. And at this time, no one is allowed to park on Route 1 or park in the parking lots of the beach. So, the noise reduction is down at this time. But as things loosen up, I'm a little worried that people will start to just, everyone is like, we're feeling like on a tightrope here. And once things start to loosen, we're just going to expand and get out and try to do things. And, we are human people and we are very social. So I just am a little concerned. And then my other part of this whole thing was the waste reduction. So like at grocery stores, we're not able to use our own bags anymore, our reusable bags. We have to use plastic. So the very thing we were trying to prevent, the overuse of plastics, now we have to stop that. So I just wonder if you could speak to that a bit.
Any of the panelists?
I'll just jump in. This is sort of beyond my daily bread, but I get concerned whenever I go shopping, the same as you, that I can no longer use my bags, and I'm holding on to all those plastics and paper for another time, right? We can reuse the plastics for doggy bags and stuff, and we can hold on to those paper bags and then recycle them or reuse them when this is over. But I can't say anything more than that. I'm not a life cycle engineer. I actually did hear from somebody once who challenged the plastic bag versus paper bag, who said from a life cycle engineering standpoint, it actually uses a lot less energy. Of course, the thing you don't like about plastic bags is when they start blowing around and then they strangle and aquatic organisms eat them and such like that. So that's bad. But that's the best I can do, sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry. Go ahead. I can't unmute you. What's going on? Same with Cameron.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. Yeah, I was just going to add a point that strikes me about that. well, the U.S. economy is to a large extent driven by consumer spending, and although it's true that there are some ways in which we may have even more waste now from plastic bags. I think a huge lesson from a lot of this for many people will be how many things you can get by without. How all those things that you were spending money on, and maybe you still kind of wish you could, but it turns out that you didn't really need them to live. And I wonder if that won't be a lasting effect too. I read an analysis of the toilet paper shortage, which was so comical early on. And the point was basically that it wasn't that people were using any more toilet paper, it was they were using it in different places. They were using it all at home instead of all at the workplace. And those are different products with different production streams and marketing and transportation and so forth. And the toilet paper manufacturer, the pulp paper, whatever industry could not shift from one to the other instantly. So it wasn't that anybody was using more of something, it was that its location had shifted. But I think of all the things that we're not doing now that we might have done in a normal week. I mean, Cameron mentioned gasoline, but all the things you might have been going to do, burning that gasoline, and for that matter, all the maintenance on your vehicles, and really how many vehicles do you need anyway? There's just a whole chain of things that I think certainly are shifting temporarily here, and maybe the lessons will be more lasting than that.
And I just reiterate that I actually, we seem to our garbage can seems to be filling up a lot less quickly here at our home. And a hypothesis might be that actually even though we have to use plastic bags when we go to the grocery store, we're generating less waste that we have to throw away because we're not rampant consumers anymore. We're very conscious about what it is we're buying, and we tend to be very focused when we go to the store and we get in and we get out. And so, maybe more on this front is sort of supporting what Larry said, is that there's this transition about we don't exist for the economy, that maybe the economy exists for us. And so maybe there'll be less waste, even if we have to increase sort of the use of plastic bags. But there's a lot of other things. The other thing I would say is that, again, if we sit back and think about what's important, big companies have pushed recycling on us, and maybe it's time to push back really hard and say, it's your problem. You need to deal with it. If I buy something from you, you take the waste. I'll keep the product. And so, the plastic bag ban is important, and straws, but it's the very thin tip of the spear, and we need to do much better, and maybe we'll just demand more going forward. And then Larry mentioned this, but I just have to repeat it, is that the gallon of gas you didn't burn is the equivalent of, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of plastic bags. And so we don't think about carbon dioxide as waste because it goes out and it disappears. But we emit many, many times more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by weight than we put garbage in our garbage can. But we think about the garbage because we see it and have to move it, and we don't think about the carbon dioxide. So when we think about waste, those byproducts that negatively impact our lives, we need to think about burning gasoline. And so I think that burning way less gasoline, each of us, is a really significant reduction in the waste that we produce.
All right. Next question is coming from Chris Rose. Chris, let me unmute you and you can go ahead and ask your question. Okay, you're good.
This is to the entire panel. All of you are educators in some way or fashion, as am I. And I'm curious how you guys are planning on incorporating this very interesting case study into your teachings of environmental studies, climate change, sociology going into the future.
Well, I'll say this about my teaching. Now, as I said, I'm a social scientist, so we aren't doing really cool studies out in the Great Bay or on ice cores and so forth. We're not doing very much field work except as it involves talking with people. But I think that there may be a sense of some things that people that have a new importance. That a lot of the issues that are coming to the foreground now, we're talking about waste and resources and science and many other things, are things that environmentalists or environmental scientists have been saying for decades. And now some of those have sort of this, as Cameron said, very, very fast life and death urgency, whereas it seemed like maybe climate change was a slow moving crisis. People are now realizing that life cannot return to normal without some kind of major scientific advances. That there's contrary to what we hear on the news, perhaps political and economic fixes won't do it. So there may be some changing attitudes, some changing priorities, and I think that will be very much more dramatic in people's minds when you talk about it in the classroom.
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris, and I think it's one we're probably going to be pondering for, dare I say, many years as we look back on this, sort of like we all learned about the Great Depression. But a couple things come to mind. One is that, sort of building on what Larry said, is that in part our reticence about dealing with climate change was that, our society can't afford to take on this big thing. It's going to cost too many jobs. Well, it turns out that we can take on big things. And when we do need money to do things, we can find that money and we can make things happen when there's enough people that think it's important enough. And so I think there's a direct example to be learned that if it's important, we need to deal with it. Let's get on with it. Another one for me is that as I sort of think about change in the Earth system, there's this English geologist called Lyell, who was a huge proponent of uniformitarianism. Sort of everything changes very slowly and gradually. And that was in sort of direct response to everything was explained by the Diluvian myths in the Bible of the flood, all our landforms. Lyell comes along and says, no, it's all slow, gradual change. And frankly, it's both. There's slow, gradual change punctuated by really rapid change. But for the last 2 decades, I've been really fascinated by the dramatic and rapid changes that our climate system goes through. And that I think what we're seeing with the recession in 2008 and now, sort of in my lifetime, those are the huge, big social upheavals. And so in some ways, I want to figure out how I can sort of share this, that there's these dramatic changes in society that result in dramatic change responses. And then there's the same thing in climate and the environment, and try to find those intersections where they're actually connected. And I haven't pulled that thought together completely yet, as you can tell. But this notion that humans, I think, tend to think about the slow, gradual change. We get older, we end up making a little bit more money, whatever. Our kids grow up, but that it's this dramatic change that we have to actually really start looking out for, because it's the thing that really ends up hurting. And then after it does hurt, there's usually an opportunity in that catastrophe.
Chris, great question. The only thing I would say is the opportunities presented by like the slides that Cameron showed earlier. It's so hard. There's this concept in ecology, shifting baselines. Are you familiar with it? So, for young people, like I have 2 18-year-olds, they're not mourning the fact that we only have 1,600 acres of eelgrass, because that's about as much as there's been most of their life, right? So they have nothing to mourn, right? It doesn't matter that we had, 3 times that back in the 50s or 40s. So there's a shifting baseline concept, and there's some really great, I would think, educational lessons in the slide that Cameron showed about all of a sudden, look, a lot of people in Venice have never seen water that clear. And that to me is amazing. And what an amazing educational opportunity. That's all I could think of.
All right, we've got time for one more question. That's going to come from Rich Carlson. Rich, I'll unmute you and you can go ahead and ask the question. I think you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rich. And my congratulations to the Gundalow and to all the panel members. And just to pick up on what people have been saying most recently, I'm wondering what could be done to educate and motivate the general public as we gradually get back into whatever the new normal might be, to get them equally motivated and educated. And is it possible that with the upcoming elections at the national and at the state level, that climate change and all the positive things that we're seeing happening over the last couple of months could be brought to people's attention and could become a significant, I guess, campaign issue? And are there organizations at the national level that might assist people like the Gundalow in bringing these topics to the national public's attention?
Yeah, I would say that's a great question, and I think that's exactly where I see the biggest potential for a lasting impact on the environment is if this changes people's awareness, changes people's voting behavior in the U.S. That would make a bigger change than the consumer changes that we're talking about would make, and there is some evidence that all these really entrenched divisions over climate change and other topics that were moving just by tiny amounts. I've been tracking climate change opinions for about 10 years now, every 3 months, and it's they are moving, but they're not moving fast, and they're not moving in response to hurricanes or any sort of extreme events like you might expect. It may be that in this fast-moving disaster, it's going to move the dial a lot farther, and to have people thinking more about what they want their candidates, their governments, their leaders, their businesses to be able to do to improve quality of life or simply life itself, rather than sort of the short-term benefits that have been dominant in recent past.
Yeah, so I also think it's a great question, and thanks for asking it. I think two things. It's a real double-edged sword, is that if you really highlight that there have been these environmental benefits, there's a very loud chorus of conservative and GOP leaders that will say, well, that's what you environmentalists have always wanted to do. You wanted to shut down our economy to take care of the environment, which is exactly not what the vast majority of environmentalists or climate scientists or even Democrats have been saying. So I think there's a challenge there is we don't want to get caught in that trap and say, look how great it is that our economy's tanked and we've cleaned up the air. The flip side is, and I think I don't think there's a lot of room for nuance in a big presidential election, but I would say that there's the satisfaction with the president is much lower than with the governors, and I think that there's a direct line that could be drawn to the extent to which members of the Republican Party have denied science, and in my world, the climate science, for decades, and that the repercussions don't happen as quickly with climate change, but they happen very quickly with COVID-19. And it's very clear from looking at the rate of infection in other countries and what our governors and our hospitals have said about a lack of material, is that the fact that our leaders did not listen to science resulted in many more people dying. I think that a crystal clear message like that actually leaves the environment out of it is really powerful in helping re-elect people that actually pay attention to science to make decisions. So in some ways, I'm sort of disagreeing with your hypothesis a little bit. I think we should keep the message very simple, acknowledging that those who listen to science will actually understand a lot of that nuance. I will sort of finish up by saying, you're asking a climate scientist about politics. So that's my big caveat. That's just my own personal opinion.
Wow, Rich, you asked the question that's gonna once you hear my answer, now Cam and I are gonna have to call each other afterwards. We're gonna argue till midnight. So it's a great question. I did my PhD on trying to understand how to get people to use science, and I did a lot of background reading. And one very disappointing thing I learned is that people don't really use science. They actually don't use rationality at all when they make decisions. It's a very small part. Mostly people use their emotional side of their brains to make decisions. They've done brain studies on people who, because of like an accident or something like that, have lost the ability to experience emotions. And everybody thought that those people were going to be great decision makers. And it turns out to be the opposite. They can't choose between a black pen and a blue pen because you use emotions for decisions. So my answer, and I'm not just saying this because, you know, I'm not giving, I'd love to hear what Larry and Cameron have to say, because I actually think they have more practical experience than I do on this. I will say that since I started my job in 2015, and you know, there's been this really crazy, virulent debate about eelgrass and the causes of the eelgrass loss. And what I have found is that pretty much everybody has their hypothesis, and it doesn't matter what information you throw at them. They just take that and they go, oh no, I'm gonna put that over here because I don't want my hypothesis to change. Confirmation bias, I think some people refer to it as. My view is, Rich, I've heard it said that there is no general public. There's just a bunch of different people, and they're going to have very different attitudes based on, well, look at Larry's presentation tonight, right? It depended on which television channel they looked at, which was a proxy for their socio-political identity. So I feel like if you really want to change people, you have to figure out where they're coming from. And there's not one message that's going to work for everybody. Cameron works with a scientist named Dr. Is it Hayhoe, Cam?
Yep.
She is in Texas, and she's been able to reach people in Texas who before she talked to them, they said climate change is, it's God. It has to do with God. It has nothing to do with humans. Well, Catherine Hayhoe is a Texan, and she's a Christian. And when she talks to people, they listen, because people are much more likely to listen to their peers than anybody else. So I think we have to be really careful about how we go about this, Rich. I think what you bring up is an incredibly important thing, but I think we have to be very, very thoughtful about how we go about it.
So can I start the argument? It just be a couple
Cam,
minutes.
I don't know if we have the time.
I got 2 minutes here. So, actually, I've learned a lot from Kala and other social scientists on the way people make decisions. And in part, that informed my answer, is that I think COVID-19 is going to connect an emotional response by people to science. So that's kind of the point I was making, was that it's not just, oh, hey, science works, they predicted the weather right. It's like, hey, science worked and I didn't die. And so I'm thinking that maybe there's an emotional context. There's clearly a percentage of the population that doesn't work for, right? They're not wearing masks. They want to go out. They're protesting shoulder to shoulder. Let them do it. Put them all in a stadium, have a rally. But I'm thinking that the majority actually that wants to keep the social distancing understands that there's information that can save your life. So agreed on that point. And I just have to, I so rarely can correct you, Kala. Catherine Hayhoe is fantastic, but she's also Canadian.
Why was she associated with Tech? Oh, because she worked down there.
Well, she's at Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas. Right. That's where her professorship is. But she's a fellow Canadian.
Thank you all for what you've done. It's a great presentation.
And thank you to the Gundalow for inviting us, and it's been a great night. Thank you all so much.
You're welcome. And I was just going to say, I wanted to thank Larry, Cameron, and Cal for being here this evening. It was a great discussion, and I actually think I smell another science cafe with just the last question that was asked, because I think we would probably spend another hour and a half on that. So stay tuned, everyone. Before I let you go, one thing, next Thursday, we're having another virtual Gundalow gathering, and this one's going to be on Viking voyages. So it's a very interesting presentation about the recreation of Leif Erikson's journey from Europe to North America. So if you want to tune in for that, 7 o'clock, same process. register, and then you get the link to the Zoom meeting. And also, what I want to do is I want to unmute everybody so you can give a round of applause to our panelists. But before I do that, just be aware that when I unmute you, we can hear everything that you're saying. So here we go. Unmuting all.
Nice one. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right,
Thank you all
everyone.
for coming.
Thank you very much.
Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll call you, Cameron.
All right.
Cecilia came around.
I want to moderate that argument.
Hi, everyone.
JB.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Just a minute. Yes, just a minute.